really, when you looked at a day at noon, the sun was at its highest point and there's no shadow. From the point that we pass noon, you're really headed toward the evening, right? The sun is starting to go down all the way from then until around 6 p.m. So really you've already moving, you're headed toward the evening, but they called evening around 3 to 6 as the sun began to go down. And then when you went past 6 o'clock, they continued with that in the watches and still called that the evening into the night. So sometime it depends on what you're saying. And, we do this type of stuff all the time. Like you all, like you might stay up late and say, I was up late tonight. I was up till 3 in the morning, right? We do that all the time. I was up all night. I didn't go to bed till 2 a.m. Well, that you really got up and you really went to sleep in the morning, right? But I'm just using an example to show you that's kind of some of the things that they went through in terms of evening and how some of these things work. Now, let me show you an example of evening being related to the sun going down. Now, let's read a scripture in Deuteronomy 16 and 6.
But at the place which the Lord thy God shall choose to place his name in, there thou shalt sacrifice the Passover at even, at the going down of the sun, at the season that thou camest forth out of Egypt.
Now, this scripture is very clear that this is related to the going down of the sun, okay? Now that's important. So we're establishing that evening sometimes is related to the going down of the sun. And this is important because when we were talking about the Passover and you killed the Passover in the evening, this is the type of evening it was talking about, that evening between 3 and 6 o'clock. That was the evening that you killed the Passover, but that's not the evening watch, okay? We're gonna talk about that in a minute. That's different. So here is the 4 watches. So let's make sure this is understood. This is different because the reason they were watching is because it was nighttime. So make sure you understand that. And the watch was watching up until a certain point. So I'll give you an example. So coming from the evening that just closed out a day, when it went into that new day at 6 o'clock, they still called that the evening watch from 6 to 9. Then the midnight watch was from 9 to 12. Well, where is midnight? Midnight is 12. We know that. So the watch is watching up unto that midnight, right? So we're watching out for midnight. We want midnight we want to make it to midnight without anyone getting hurt. So someone's watching, right? So from 9 to 12. Cock crowing watch was from 12 to 3. And when I talked to you earlier, I told you that cock crowing time was from 3 to 6, but that's different. We're talking about the time versus the watch. They're watching out to make sure we make it to cock crowing time. This was around the time the roosters began to crow. And then the morning watch was from 3 to 6, right? Not the morning time, but the morning watch, because they were watching out to make sure the morning would come, that we would make it to the morning. And then a new day began at 6 a.m. And from 6 to 6, you had a full day. From 6 a.m. to 6 p.m., you had a full 12-hour day. So make sure you know the difference here between the time of the day and the watches of the night. Okay, very important to understand the difference. So just keep that in mind. You can come back and you can study some of these things. But let's look at a scripture in John 11 and 9 and what Jesus mentioned here about the day.
Jesus answered, "Are there not 12 hours in the day? If any man walk in the day, he stumbleth not, because he seeth the light of this world."
All right, so Jesus establishes clearly here that there are 12 hours in the day. And really, this is what they focused on. So the 12 hours in a day, this is what in the daytime, they really went more by the 12 hours in the day. Now, I just used the morning time was about here, evening cock crowing, and you can know that just in terms of time elements, right? But they really went by the 12 hours, and that's why you hear them say the first hour, the 9th hour, the 12th, all the third hour, because that's kind of how they went in that 12 hours in a day. They just focused on that. Now, the watches is what was at night. Now, in the Old Testament, there was 3 watches. So let me show you some examples here. So let's go back here to the presentation. So in the Old Testament, there used to be 3 watches at night. And you can find this with the scriptures. I'm not going to read these, but from sunset to 10 p.m. was called the beginning of the watches, or the first watch. Lamentations 2:19 references this. And then from 10 p.m. to 2 a.m. was the middle watch. Judges 7:19 references this. And then from 2 a.m. to sunset again was the morning watch. And this is referenced in Exodus 14 and 24. So you can, this is good history to understand. There used to be 3 watches in the Old Testament, okay? So, but by the time Rome came, they added a 4th watch in the days of Rome. And this was happened amongst the Jews when they were under the leadership of Rome. They added a 4th watch, okay? So important to understand. It's just some good history, just some good things to understand, good things to know. Now, let's look at a scripture in Matthew 14 and 25.
And in the 4th watch of the night, Jesus went unto them walking on the sea.
So the 4th watch of the night. Now I'm going to go back here really quick and to the watches here. So you can see when we talk about the 4 watches, again, you have the evening, midnight, cock crowing, and morning, but also this was sometimes referenced as the 1st, 2nd, 3rd, and 4th watch. And so this is again, what they're talking about when they mention this, okay? Now let me show you an example of a little illustration of what this would look like in a normal Jewish day. So here's a good illustration. So from sunrise that you see in the blue, which would be 6 a.m., all the way to 9 a.m. 9 a.m. would be the 3rd hour. And you notice sometime in what we went over in part 1 of Truth versus Tradition, we found out exactly, at the 3rd hour, darkness came over Jerusalem. We found out what happened at the 6th hour. All these things were in the scriptures. And then they went, 3 more hours, brought you to the 6th hour, the 9th hour, then you got all the way to the 12th hour. So the blue was the 12 hours of the day. But then at night, you begin the 4 watches, right? So from 6 p.m. to 9 a.m. was the evening watch. 9 to 12, the midnight watch. 12 to 3, cock crowing watch, and then from 3 to 6, the morning watch. So all of this, when you're reading the scriptures and we're exploring things about Jewish custom and how it relates to the understanding we have, we want to understand this is the framework that they worked in, and this is the difference in time. So I wanted to spend a little time on that because I know sometimes there could be confusion about when you hear cock crowing time, midnight in the morning, but hopefully it's clear now. We're talking about the evening time, for example, versus the evening watch. Very different. The morning time versus the morning watch. Very different. Now, I want you to see something here in this illustration about the sun. So they did their timing by the sun. They did other timings by the moon. That's why you hear them talking about new moons and so forth. But with respect to the sun and what related to a day, when the sun went down and completely down, that closed a day and it started a new day. Okay, but I want you to notice when the sun is setting, light and darkness are kind of merging together. Like there's some light and there's some darkness. So at what point is it the new day, right? How dark is dark, right? That's the challenge when you're going by the sun, versus maybe a clock, right? Because they're literally looking at that. But normally the sun would be down around the same time every day, about 6 p.m. But when you think about light and darkness and how darkness and light kind of come together, this is very similar to how the days kind of merged and why sometimes it takes some understanding to understand why, when we talked about on one particular day, you at 6 o'clock, you've left a day and went into another day. And we're used to wait until midnight and saying that midnight is when a day changes, but we start to see a blending of days. And so this is again, to understand about light and darkness with the sun.